Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm delighted on this episode to be talking with author and editor Jack C. Harris. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming in. Thanks for joining. So you have spent time as an editor, you've spent time as a writer. There are a number of folks who have been on the show who have spoken kindly of you. I'm going to say the name Dan Mishkin. Dan
Oh,
Mishkin
yeah.
I believe,
Mhm.
was someone that you worked with early on and discovered, I believe.
I bought his first story, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, are there any other folks that you want to mention before I ask you a little bit about your comics history? Other folks who you had the good fortune to find in the world of comics?
Well, the three I always mention right up top, besides Michigan and Gone, um, Trevor Von Eden, who
Mhm,
went
mhm.
to do Black Lightning, discovered him. He sent when he was like 15. He sent some drawings in, and I was wowed by them, and took him down to Joe Orlando, and in a very remarkably short amount of time, Trevor was drawing the first issues of Black Lightning. Um, Youngest artist that we ever employed. And then the letterer, John Workman, uh,
Mhm, mhm.
he and his best buddy, Bob Smith, who's the inker, came in on the same day. And Bob Razakis and I were the first line of defense. We went in and we were the first guys to go in and check people whether they could get past the lobby.
Yeah.
And when we saw John and Bob, we were like floored. And before, again, a remarkably short amount of time, uh, Bob was inking Ramona Fradon on Plastic Man, and John Workman was working in our production room. So it was like those three guys, Trevor Mike Eden and John Workman and Bob Smith, are three that I first encountered, and they later went on to have stellar careers, and I'm very proud of that.
Love it, love it. That's got to be one of the best parts of being an editor is getting
All
to
right,
discover and nurture talent that way.
very, very much so.
Yeah. Did you have folks like that, positive folks early on that sort of pulled you in and
Oh yeah, I mean, I luckily had connected with Denny O'Neil and Julie Schwartz. So when I applied to get a position at DC, they were both there and both remembered me fondly from our previous encounters. So it was a good link to have to get my foot in the door. It was very good.
yeah,
And they were very helpful all the way through. So it was great.
yeah. So what was it about the written word and storytelling that drew you in as a writer?
Well, it's really funny because I wanted to be an artist, is what I really wanted to do.
Ah,
And I went to the University of the Arts in Philadelphia studying illustration, and that was my goal.
mhm,
However, in my I guess it was my sophomore year of college, and I've told this story many times. I read an article about Michael Uslan. And Michael, of course, later became the executive producer on all the Batman movies,
mhm,
and
mhm.
was an assistant editor like me at DC first. But he got some publicity by teaching a comic book course uh, at the University of Indiana, an accredited course. And he wrote a whole book about that. And we were inspired by Michael. Right? We read about him in the newspapers, and some friends of mine and I were all comic fans at the University of the Arts. We approached our liberal arts department, say if we could do something similar, and we outlined a course and they approved it, and we taught it for 2 semesters. And in doing that, we had people from the comic industry come and speak at our course.
Mhm.
And and while doing that, I got the opportunity to write an article about our course and about comics for a teacher's magazine who was interested in unique courses that were being offered at college and high schools and things. And I realized at that point it was a whole lot easier to write something than it was to draw it. And the joke I always say is, it's a lot easier to write, 10,000 Indians come running over the hill than it is to draw them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's when I switched my emphasis. And then when I became an assistant editor, then I was right on the forefront of working with the written word, as you said. And that's when I sort of switched over to it. But it was helpful. I thought it's very helpful having the art background, because when I'm writing a script and describing artwork to artists, I
Mhm.
knew I knew the terminology. I knew what to say and to get the images that I wanted out of them. That helped a lot as a writer and an editor. And I used to surprise some artists where they would come in and they would draw something. I said, "No, how about like this?" And I would do a sketch, and they go, "Oh, I didn't know you could draw," you know. And that was a very helpful background to have in that capacity.
Love it. That is some insightful editorial feedback to get a quick sketch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you continue and have you continued a role as an educator with?
Well, I just retired, a couple of years ago from the School of Visual Arts, when I taught for like 35 years,
Yeah.
three different courses there. And yeah, I sort of retired from that, but I still, that was the whole editorial thing helped the teaching, because editors are basically teachers anyway.
Mhm,
That's what they
mhm.
do. They teach, or at least guide, writers and artists into what they think is viable storytelling. And that's why editors are there, because they know that.
Right.
They've, whatever background they have, they've demonstrated the fact that they can tell stories and guide people into telling stories and things like that. So, everything I ever edited, I would say 90% of the scripts that I got were from people who had been in the industry sometimes longer than I have, and they knew what they were doing. So my any contribution I gave to it, or guidance I gave to it, was based on my own background, and it was sort of meshing of the two sensibilities, whatever they were doing, and attached with what I was doing, and we always thought it came out better, and they always appreciated. I would, even from the professionals like Danny O'Neill, who's been around forever. He always liked when I made a suggestion. He liked it. He said, something I didn't think that way, or I wouldn't have thought of that. So that's good. And it worked out. And it was both ways. As a writer, I got the same thing from editors. It was odd, because my relationship with Danny was funny, because sometimes he was my editor and I was a writer, and sometimes I was the editor and he was the writer. And it was like a very strange back and forth type of thing. But at some point, we couldn't remember whose idea that particular thing was. Who came up with that? It was good and it came out that way, but we couldn't say, "Oh yeah, that was my idea," or "Yeah, that was Danny's idea." We couldn't remember. It was too much of a collaborative effort to really divide it up like that. And that happened a lot.
That's a sign of a great collaboration when you get to the end and you sort of look at it and go, was that you? Or was that me?
Yes,
Is that
I
both of
always thought we should record everything so we could go back and say who had that idea first.
you? That's right. Tally marks.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now you also continued as a writer, and I have several favorite titles of yours, but I'll ask you your favorite. Of course, The Ray is one that I was revisiting earlier today, actually. Um, Enjoy the Batman Elseworlds creations, and so you have Castle of the Bat, and of
Right.
course Sergeant Rock. You have a pretty impressive run
Yeah,
of it.
couple. Well, I did a lot of. I made Gravedigger stories more than Sergeant Rock, but my last Gravedigger, I teamed him up with Sergeant Rock, so that was great. I was proud of that one. And as you mentioned, the Castle of the Bat is one of my favorite things that I've done. I think that stands up pretty well. I like that one. And there were some minor things that I had done that I think. I did a independent thing. It was originally for Gold Key Comics, but then it never got published. But it was published by Robin Snyder as a Ditko feature called Star Guider, which I was extremely proud of. And at least it got published, at least 3 stories. So that was proud of that one too. So a few things. Sometimes some individual stories I thought were really good. Little mystery stories that I did just clicked. So it's hard to tell now, without going back and reading them all, which ones were my favorite or things like that.
I,
The
I
ones
would
I
definitely
remember, I guess, are my favorite ones.
I would imagine they all run together after.
Yeah, it's all one big blur. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anybody that you would like to shine a light on, either currently working in the industry that you're paying attention to, or someone who you just looking back, you really appreciate them and
Well,
appreciate.
I mean, I just wrote a book. It's coming out next month from TwoMorrows about Steve Ditko, my working with Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
And of all the people I work with, he has to be the one that's on the top. I mean, first of all, his stellar reputation and the fact that I linked up with him so often, I did so many things, and that I always think that's going to be my legacy, my work with Steve Ditko, both as editor and writer. So that's the one. But then, I mean, I got to work with so many of the people that I was, you know, a fan of as a kid.
Mhm.
You know, people like editor Julius Schwartz, and artists like Joe Kubert and Carmen Infantino and Murphy Anderson and all these people that I was a big fan of as a kid, and then I got to work with them. I mean, I couldn't, you can't say anything bad about that. It was just like the most wonderful thing you could possibly think of. I mean, and working at DC Comics, it was like being, I think I've told people this before, it was like being at a comic convention 24/7. It was just
Mhm. Mhm.
because if you were there working and then somebody would come in and it would be Kurt Swan would come in or Steve Ditko would come in or Jack Kirby would drop by, things like that. And they were in a professional capacity. It wasn't like they were talking to a bunch of fans. They were
Mhm.
talking to colleagues, and it was a whole different mindset and a different atmosphere to be in, than a fan, asking for an autograph or things
Mhm.
like that. He was just talking on a equal level. It was just great. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating things, and to have Kirby just drop by. That's
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. That's how I met Steve Ditko. He was just dropping by, dropping some work off. And, oh, Steve Ditko. And well, thing is, we were in the Warner Brothers building.
Mhm.
Um, we shared a floor with Warner Records, and back then DC was relatively small. We had half of the space on the sixth floor of the Warner building. That was it. Just we had a hall of editorial, we had a production room, we had a bullpen, executive offices, and a dark room. And that was it. The whole thing fit on this half a floor. But since it was in the Warner Brothers building and the record things, we would encounter people in the elevators all the time.
Mhm.
I get in the elevator and I ride the elevator with Robert Redford. Or I'd get in the elevator and there was Barbara Walters was being in the elevator, or I would see Jackie Cooper would come in the elevator, or of course Christopher Reeve came in a couple of times and hung out at the offices, and I had a conversation in the lobby once with Elliot Gould down by the newsstand in the
Oh,
lobby.
nice.
I played, Dodge. Who's going to go through the door first with Mick Jagger one time? I mean, it's a long list of people that I encountered outside of the comic industry just because of where I was in New York. In that Warner building, you're just going to naturally encounter those people. And sometimes you got the chance to sit and or stand and talk to them. So that's actually one thing I miss. I used to, when I worked at the School of Visual Arts and I had left DC, I'd still go into the city once a week to teach. So
Mhm.
I miss the city in that those chance encounters that I would see. Just people in the street. You read about it, you hear about it. I saw someone in the street, but I used to go and it would happen about once a month. I would either pass somebody in the street or actually sit and talk to somebody. I mean, I remember being in behind the line in the bank with Richard Pryor was in front of me in the bank,
Oh,
and we had a brief conversation. I saw Liza Minnelli back in the days of phone booths. I saw Liza Minnelli in a phone booth on Fifth Avenue. I saw the last famous person I saw in New York was Donald Sutherland. We passed each other in the street, and I waved, and he waved back, and that was my last celebrity encounter in New York was Donald Sutherland. And amazing type of things like that. And then of course the comic industry. Any person you could think of in the comic industry, I'm talking about the silver, bronze age type of ages. I've met just about everybody that
Mhm.
worked in the industry at that time at some point. So it was great.
Pretty
And I don't
impressive.
follow it as much. I don't follow as much as I do now. Today, I don't follow it as much as before. I mean, sometimes I'll encounter see something that I'm interested in, I'll pick it up, or someone will send me something that I had something to do with years ago, and there's some new stuff in there, and I get into it. But I don't really keep up with it as much as I used to, just
Uh,
because I'm too busy. Too busy being retired, which is very nice.
and writing a book. I always like to have
And writing a book,
creative
yes. I
direction.
mean,
So yeah.
I wrote that. I mean, I pitched that book. I guess it was about a year and a half ago, and then John Morrow called me up and said, "Yeah, I think we want to do this." I said, "Okay, great," and we negotiated a deal, and I started writing. Writing it, and I actually hand delivered the manuscript to him at the Baltimore Comic Convention last October. So it'll be a year. It took a year for them to put it together and publish it. And they did a fantastic job. A guy named John Cook, who was the designer of the book, and I sent him, God, I don't know how many uh, files that I had of Xeroxes of stuff that Ditko had done, stuff that people never seen that have been in my files for years. I sent him like 2 or 3 little flash drives filled with that stuff along with the book, and they put it together just beautifully. I was stunned at how beautiful it looks. And yeah, about a year. It took him a year to put it all together and publish it. So I'm very excited about
Sounds like you had the opportunity to dig through some of your old archives, and I imagine there was a good bit of research that went into it.
it. Oh yeah, I mean it was a lot of it. I would say a good 70% of it was off the top of my head, just remembering it. But
Mhm.
then I had to go back and research when things happened. What year did this come out? Did this come before that, or I had to go back and sort of figure out the timeline of everything. But luckily, I mean, I used the pandemic to organize my house. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
I had nothing else to do, so I completely organized my garage and my closets and everything. So everything, and it's maintained that way. Everything is in order. You can see the nice shelves behind me.
I was going
Uh,
to say you have
every,
Marvel Essentials there.
yes, everything is in order, and everything is very nice, and I can find anything. So I mean, one of the reasons I sent that pitch off to John Morrow is that I had all the stuff. I had all the Xeroxes of things I worked with Steve, all in one big giant file. I had everything. And I said, well, I can just scan this and I can send that in and we can use that. And since I had all that material, I said, I have to share this. I can't just let this go. I can't let it sit and rot in a file. I have to get it out there. So that's what I did. And but the fact that I had it all organized and straightened it all up, 40 years of accumulating junk, it was great. Yeah, so something that everyone should have the opportunity to do who's a collector, you know. So
The revisits. So you mentioned that you dropped the manuscript off at Baltimore. Will you be back at Baltimore this year?
yes, in fact, hopefully we're going to do a signing at the booth um, this year. I've been invited to be on a editors panel as well. So I'm only there for the Saturday, just the one day, because I can drive there from where I live. I can a couple hour drive and I can get there. And so I'm going to just spend the day Saturday. I think it's the 9th of September. I think. Yeah, so a couple weeks, and yeah, spend the day there. At the TwoMorrows booth, and also wandering around because there's a whole long list of people that I know that I want to see there. So, and I've gone every year. I think for about 7 or 8 years I've been there every year. I always go to the Baltimore convention. I missed COVID, otherwise I've been there all the time because it's like I said, it's an easy trip, and I have a lot of friends that attend that, so I like to go.
Yeah. Do you have other conventions that you usually make?
There's a one-day convention in Ocean City, Maryland, in October that I always go to. Again, it's a quick trip, but I have a friend. We actually share a booth with this toy not a manufacturer, a toy distributor. There's an old friend of mine back from Delaware, back before I was even in the industry.
Mm.
He and a friend used to own the local comic shop down in Wilmington, Delaware. So I used to, and in fact, if you want to get a historical link, one of the girls who worked in his shop was Joyce Brabner, who later married Harvey Peacock.
Oh,
So that's the link that I have with all of them. So but yeah, Craig Dawson's his name. He's a toy distributor in Delaware, and we share a booth at the October convention all the time. So that's always fun to go. And I'm thinking I think I want to go to San Diego next year, but
mm,
that takes a year of planning. So,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm just starting now because they keep inviting me to the Ditko panel and I haven't been there. So I haven't been to the Baltimore Comic Con since like '89. That's how long ago it was. And I tell you how long ago it was because I remember one of the instances, and this is how things have changed. Uh, I was standing at the revolving door and I'm waiting, for somebody else to come through the revolving door, and it's Stan Lee.
Uh,
No entourage, no security guards, just Stan coming in. And he came in, and I've met Stan before, so we stood there and talked for 5 minutes, and not realizing who he was. So, but that's changed so much. And the last time I saw Stan was, he was surrounded by a security detail, and you couldn't get close to him.
wow.
So things have changed since then. But
That,
yeah, I like to go back just because I've been invited, and it's been a long time. So
and
also,
now you have
other work.
Working with Ditko to talk about the book.
That's right. Now I have something to talk about that I have done recently. So yeah, I have something to plug and something to talk about. So it's very good. I'm looking forward to it. Again, they pulled a few advance copies for San Diego, so it was they had a few. They didn't sell any, but they had to show, so
Mhm.
people were aware of it at San Diego. It was on their table so I was excited about that. So I'm sure they have, and the actual publication date I think is the end of September
Mhm.
or the 1st of October. But they're going to have some advanced copies at Baltimore, so I'll be able to have a signing there at least briefly. So, and maybe more of that will come up as it comes along. I don't know. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to send me your favorite bookstore link, or I can use the publisher link, I'll make sure that appears in the description on the podcast so that people can click and go straight to it.
Okay, I would just say give them a link to TwoMorrows Publishing. That's the
Yep.
best thing.
Yep.
You know,
I'll do it. I'm going to make
yeah,
myself a note right now.
yeah, because they can get it directly from them. I mean, the other day I stumbled upon it on Amazon. It's already listed on Amazon, but
Uh-huh.
again, from TwoMorrows. So all the link is back to TwoMorrows Publishing. So that's where you can get it.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I'll make sure to link that. Anything else in the talk that you'd like to make sure to mention? Any other most positive collaborative memory or upcoming
Well,
creative
it's
direction?
like I mean, I had a couple of long runs with things that I really liked. I really liked working with Dick Ayers.
Mm-hmm.
Dick, as an editor and as a writer, Dick drew a bunch of books for me. He drew the Secret Society of Supervillains, and then he drew all my Commandy stories that
Mm-hmm.
I and the Commandy stories he used to really stun me. He would always surprise me with how good the artwork. I always say that Dick wasn't the best artist in the world, but he was one of the best storytellers. You could put anything you wanted in a story, and he would make it work. You could have like 20 characters in a panel, and he would make it work. He would add things, visuals that you didn't think about to your story, and it would just be mind-boggling. He would just surprise me. Luckily, we have some really, really good inkers on his stuff in Commandy, so the artwork always looks stunning when they finished it up. I was really happy with it, and he was a great guy to talk to. Chris, I mean, he inked the first issue of Fantastic Four. He was there, from the beginning. He used to write, draw Ghost Rider and Human Torch back in the golden age of comics, you know. And so here he was. He was in Marvel forever, and then he came over to DC and just stuff for us. And so he was like a wealth of comics history all in one package. And you could sit there and talk for hours with Dick about everything. And he, you know, like I'm at the point where I know everybody in the Silver Age. He knew everybody in the Golden Age, and you know he had crossed paths with all of them. He could tell you all the stories about everybody back there. So that was a great collaborative effort. I really liked working with Dick Ayers. And then, of course, Denny O'Neil, my old mentor. Anytime I got a chance to work with Denny was great. Julie Schwartz, who was, you know, the editorial god that I worshipped as a kid. Anything that was edited by Julie Schwartz, I would buy. You know, if it was a choice, were you going to buy this or are you going to buy that? Well, this is edited by Julie, so yes, we'll buy that. And that's how it worked for that. And my favorite story with Julie Schwartz is the first time I wrote a story for it. I wrote a Supergirl story for Julie. He was doing Superman Family. And again, I was working at DC at the time. So I turned the script in. He was about, hang that up. He was about two or three offices down the hallway from me. So I remember turning the script in and going back to my office and being unable to work for the next hour because, you know, here he is. Julie Schwartz is editing my script in there. What's going to happen? Oh my God. And so about an hour later, he comes back and he leans in the door of my office and he has the script in one hand and a blue pencil on the other. And he taps the script and he goes, "This is fine." And then he walks back into his office. And I'm going, you know, I just sold a script to Julie Schwartz, you know, and he said it was fine. So, I mean, I thought that was the best compliment I ever had, you know, at that point in my career, you know.
Oh yeah.
Julie Schwartz said it was fine. Okay, then that's better than anyone else saying it was excellent, you know. So that was a great collaboration, you know. And then, you know, on the other end of it, collaborating with Trevor Von Eden, you know, like guiding Trevor in his first efforts through Black Lightning was fun. Working with, and again, I worked with a lot of people who started stuff like Tony Isabella with Black Lightning, you know, Jerry Conway with Firestorm, and Steve Ditko with Shade the Changing Man. You know, all those collaborations were very, very special to me since those were great characters and great creators to work with at the initial run of those particular characters. So it was always exciting. And those were my favorites, the ones that I, off the top of my head, are the ones that I'm sure I could think of others if I sat and talked about it longer. But those are the ones that I remember most fondly and right away.
Yeah. I was just listening to an interview with Jerry Conway just this past week on the Epic Marvel podcast. And enjoying hearing some of his perspective and experiences with the 70s monster comics and
right. He it's funny, Jerry and I and both of our ex-wives, the four of us, we used to go out all the time. The four of us was a little quartet, and we would go to dinner and sit around and play backgammon and things like that. We were very tight for a while, you know. But that was a good memory.
Great to talk with you, and glad to share about working with Ditko, and glad to talk anytime.
Okay, anytime you want to call back, let me know, and I'll try to be here on time.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.